Today's topic, a board game adaptation of a video game, does not compute. Welcome to TABLEscraps, short discussions about board, card, and tabletop gaming, submitted by the viewing audience and discussed with the viewing audience. Hey there everyone! Welcome back to another episode of TABLEscraps, the show where we discuss a topic about tabletop, board, and card gaming with the live streaming chat. I'm your host, Chaz Marler, and today's topic of discussion does not come from me, but it also comes from a viewer in our live streaming chat. Today's topic comes from viewer Stephen Miller, who says he wants to talk about video game crossovers. As Flip the Table podcast illustrates, board games themed around video games are a tradition going back to the 80s, while video game adaptations of board games are likely as old as the earliest chess implementation on computers, if not even older. But recently, there have been good board games themed around specific video games, such as XCOM and BioShock Infinite, that have very little mechanically to do with the game that they are adapting. While the likes of Adrenaline manages to take the generic concept of a mid to late 90s first-person shooter multiplayer a la Quake and successfully implements the concept as an area majority game that almost feels like a Euro. While in the other direction, Splatoon and its sequel almost seems to take the concept of a Euro area control concept and successfully implements it as a third-person 4v4 squad shooter. So I'm wondering, are there more concepts associated with analog games that could be implemented as digital games or vice versa? And are those concepts as unlikely seeming on the surface as both Adrenaline and Splatoon? And are there crossover titles, both board games based on specific video games and taking broader concepts of video games into board games and vice versa? Are those good for the respective industries, either creatively or broadening the market? Where do video game companies deciding to make the occasional board game fit into the puzzle, such as Riot Games' Mechs vs. Minions, or those couple of board game companies taking their app implementations to the properties in-house? Wow, Stephen, that is an extensive idea there to unpack. Fortunately, I think there's a lot here that we can discuss. And who knows, maybe we'll branch off into other episodes. I'm not sure, but let's find out. First of all, as for how successful these adaptations can be, I think it also depends on what the designers are trying to get out of it. For example, traditionally, digital implementations of board games started out as just a one-to-one analog almost of basically recreating the board game, even down to just having the same board game art and stuff on screen, in the app. So you'd load up the app and it was just like playing a digital implementation of the board game. This seems to be changing a little bit. That idea now is starting to be seen as more of just a jumping off point. And more companies seem to be expanding on this. I believe the Through the Ages app that is going to be coming out, which is a digital application of the Through the Ages card game, adds more than just the cards. There's a little city you build that you actually see and things will be put in it, kind of a la the Civ computer game series a little bit. And Takedo was recently developed, which takes the Takedo board game and makes it more of have a little 3D characters that are traveling down a road, kind of making it more of a 3D environment that you're going down. You also talked about, other mechanisms. And just real quick before we go to the chat, I want to mention, I think the number one mechanism for me that I would really like to see come from the digital realm over to the board game realm is a tower defense game. Now, there have been a few. There have been like Castle Panic and Xenoshift, which are decent games, really good games. But even then, it doesn't give me the same sense of a tower defense game that a digital app like Kingdom Rush will do. If there was a game that I felt like I was doing, a paper and cardboard version of Kingdom Rush, oh my goodness, that is what I would like to see. So I think there's still room to grow. There's more room for exploration, both on the board game side and the digital side. There's things that they're going to come up with that we haven't even seen yet. I'm really looking forward to those experiences. But for now, let's go experience what the people in the live chat are having to say, starting with Toyota, who says, I find that games that have an overlord adapt really well to having a nice iOS or Android companion app, which allows for randomness and more replayability, i.e. Descent or Mansions of Madness. Yes, if you can take that app and have the app be a randomized, customizable overlord to control the game to allow the players to play against it, I think that is a fantastic implementation of an app in a board game. Absolutely agree there. Kubuki says, I have not yet played it, but I have heard from some gamers that this War of Mine as a board game is possibly better than the video game. I've also heard the opposite, to be fair. I know I've heard that the digital version of this War of Mine can really make an emotional connection with the players. And if the board game, if some people feel the board game does it even more, wow, that would be really interesting to see. So like I said, yeah, like with everything, you hear both sides of the argument, but it might be worth checking out just to see what other people's experience with that is. Fail Road Express chugs on in to say, there was a PlayStation 1 game of Life Simulator. It was a waste of life. I'm wondering what would happen if Life Simulator was turned into a board game. Now, true, it may not ever happen because if the video game bombed, there's very little likelihood that the board game version of it is going to be. But I wonder if a video game that bombs is one salvageable. Do we have examples of a video game that failed miserably where the board game adaptation succeeded? Off the top of my head, I can't think of anything because all I can think of right now is Life Simulator. But let me know in the comments below if you know of any examples where that's been the case. Christopher says, I think more and more you won't have to think of them as separate things. Oh, very clever. Helper apps can bring digital elements to the tabletop, like Renegade's apps for Clank and games like that, and vice versa with Lightbringers. I talked about how when the digital app actually is not a one-to-one analog of the board game, that is like almost the opposite of blurring the lines. But I think as apps become more and more common being used by in board games, I think that their presence is going to just become a lot more seamless and a lot more almost expected in some games. There may be types of games, genres or mechanisms that in a few years it's going to be expected that genre or mechanism, oh yeah, they're going to have an app to control that in the game. That's just going to become the expectation. That's one of my predictions for like within the next 3 to 5 years of board gaming. We'll see just how inaccurate an expectation it is. Actor 2120 simply voices his opinion by saying companion apps equal best of both worlds. Do you think that the Mansions of Madness app that controls the scenario, would you consider that a companion app? Where is that line? Where is that line drawn? Because, you have the app implementations of a board game, and then you have things that just help you like do the scoring, like the one for the app for Sheriff of Nottingham. Mansions of Madness is controlling the game a little bit more. Where does that fit in the spectrum? Is it a companion app or is it not? I would be interested to find out what your guys' opinion on that is. Toyota reminds us that, oh yes, First Martians app. Haven't played it yet. Sad that is. First Martians, its app not only is required, but the First Martians app is designed to create a sense of continuity from one game to the next. A decision you make in game 1 may have a repercussion down the line in like game 4 that you play of that campaign. It remembers what you did and things will happen because of it. That takes the companion app to a whole new level. And I'm really interested in finding out if that becomes more and more commonplace. Personally, I doubt it because the First Martians app, I believe, added at least an entire year to the development of that game. So it is not an easy thing to do, but perhaps as time goes by and technology improves, perhaps it'll become easier to pull off. But it's an amazing feat of technology and one that I would love to see what people do with it. But yeah, First Martians, definitely a way to go with the app. Snowboard Gamer slides on by to say, I was suspicious at first, but Plague Inc., the board game, was very well done. Oh, there we go. I have not I unfortunately do not have familiarity yet with Plague Inc. either in digital or board game form, but based on your recommendation, I am going to go and check them out as well. So if anyone else knows of any others, let us know so we can maybe create like a little library or a geek list of something of some of these games to check out and compare. That would be really, really helpful. Gazencha says, would love to see more attempts at taking tutorials into board games. I think the Fast Forward series might represent a start for that. That's interesting. That's something I had not thought of. Now, there, of course, are online tutorial videos, and there's this Dized app that is in development, which is supposed to be an app that leads you through the game. But it would be neat, a board game where they give you an app that gives you like a tutorial, walks you through a tutorial first mission. We actually play through the game, but it leads you through almost like how video games do, where the first intro missions kind of just introduce you to the game concepts. And you're playing a stripped down, simplified mission, but you are playing the game. That might be a heretofore untapped way that apps can be integrated into games. So I think that's a really good example there. So thank you for that one. That's given me a whole new thing to think about there, Kazencha. Kabuki mentions that it can almost be argued that Time Stories is simply a cooperative version of the old point-and-click adventure game from the 80s and 90s. Seventh Continent now has some of that as well. Yeah, I can totally see that being an analog version of those old point-and-click games of let's try this. No, that doesn't do it. You don't have the sense of trying to get equipment and combine it together as much as you kind of did sometimes. Well, maybe you do. But regardless, I think that demonstrates one of the strengths of board games, how it can take lots of different mechanisms and mix and mingle them together to create new experiences, even when the technology for those might not be available or as popular anymore. Board games really have the power to put a new twist on it, which can be really cool. Tom mentions, I'm not sure if this actually addresses the question, but I am only drawn to games that have an app for play assistance, not analog games ported over to digital. I think that's totally relevant. I'm thinking about it, and I'm thinking I might actually be in the same boat. I have several board game apps on my iPad, and I have several companion apps. And I think that I use the companion apps actually more often than I do the actual digital implementations of board game apps. So I don't think you're alone on there. I think it is relevant to the conversation, and I think you're not the only person that kind of skews that way. So I'm wondering if anyone else has a preference. Given the two, which one do you find yourself actually using more often? Toxic Candy joins us to tempt us with the saying that... I don't know what that was there. Toxic Candy comes by to tempt us with the treat that someone should take Dungeon Keeper app into a board game. Dungeon Keeper would... Now wait, what about Dungeon Pets? Is that too similar? I thought Dungeon Keeper is where you was a video game where you played that you were actually the bad guy in a dungeon creating traps, trying to kill off the heroes. And actually, if that is the case, the card game Boss Monster might actually be the best version of that we have. So I don't know. Let me know. You know what I'm gonna have to do is I'm gonna have to go refresh my memory on Dungeon Keeper, and but let me know if anyone else feels that there are games that have done that, and if so, some examples, because that might help Toxic Candy be pointed towards some board games that they are looking for. So let's see what we can come up with for that. Gazencha adds, but procedural storytelling has some fascinating stuff happening in both board games, like Robinson Crusoe, and video games, but the approaches seem very distinct. And yes, that's another thing that is cool. Just by their very nature of the way that human beings will interact with them, the approaches that they take to achieve the same result will be vastly different between a video game and a board game. And I think that that can really be a strength of both platforms. But it is neat how they do have to approach them in different ways. Manuel mentions that I had the chance to design Superhot, the card game, and learned that trying to simply simulate it made it very cumbersome. Instead, emulate the most important decisions you make while playing. Well, that's a really interesting point of this. As from a game design concept, there is going to be different aspects of game design that you have to focus on. I like that of focusing on emulating the decisions that you have to make, the core guts of the game that make it the game. That's a really good perspective on this, and one that if you don't have that perspective, I think that the designer will run into troubles, and I think we've seen that in some games that try to do too much sometimes when implementing a variation of a digital or board game. Factor 2120 also mentions, in my opinion, no matter the game, interaction and experience with friends and family that board games bring is hard to replicate in a video game. Very true. It goes both ways. Two of the apps that I will play with my wife and daughter the most often one is the digital app of Forbidden Island, but we actually prefer the actual physical version of Forbidden Island. However, we also play the digital version of Can't Stop. And I actually prefer the digital version of Can't Stop because there's a little less bookkeeping and maintenance that you got to do with putting down your little pegs and swapping out the colored pegs and everything, and it calculates what you can do with the dice for you. So, the level of bookkeeping for Can't Stop just streamlines it a little bit more in the app. The interaction with friends is sometimes the board game, the maintenance it requires can prevent you from having as much interaction as you want with your friends. And we actually have more fun and more interaction when we play the digital version of Can't Stop. So I think that is a really good example there, 2120. And I think it is, again, really relevant to the conversation. We're going to wrap up today with a comment from Fail Road Express, which is that I'm okay if there's a companion app for a game. But if the game requires the app, I'm not sure it's going to last. We want to be able to play great games 50 years from now. And that is, I think, a really good place to stop, because that opens the door for an entirely new discussion. Are required apps painting that game into a corner and prematurely stopping the longevity of that board game? That may be a topic that we pick up for an entire new episode, because it's one that I think we could really expand on. Unfortunately, we're not going to be able to expand on it now because we're out of time for this episode. But if you'd like to continue the conversation on this topic or anything related, you are welcome to do so either in the YouTube comments below and over on the Pair of Dice Paradise Facebook and Twitter area account location pages. And I want to remind everyone that episodes like this are made possible by viewers like you who have been supporting the Pair of Dice Paradise fundraisers over on the PodPledge website. Right now, we are raising funds to finance 2018. And so if you would like to help contribute to keep these videos coming and growing, your assistance is appreciated. So until next time, I've been Chaz Marler, who along with the YouTube live streaming chat have been serving up some table scraps. Thanks. I'll talk to you again soon. Starting the video, making neat sounds to go along with it. Today's topic is gone, and are there... I'll get this. Don't worry. Let me grab a screenshot here before they scroll away, and it makes me sad. Why don't we scroll away? This is 43. Why don't we scroll away into the chat? Because that's where it's at. Oh boy, I hope that doesn't turn out as embarrassing as it felt coming out, because, oh brother. Okay.